So hi everyone, thanks for coming to the 16th Annual Women in Sports Business Symposium. Over the years, this conference has provided a unique context to honor women in sports business and provide a forum to discuss current industry trends. So continuing this year, we have an impressive lineup here to speak to you guys tonight, including Micky Lawler of Octagon Tennis. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Paul Svangard, the Managing Director of the Warsaw Sports Marketing Center.
Thanks, Christina, and thanks to her team. I know she'll be up a little bit later to say some official thank yous to all of them. This has always been an event that is designed by the students and executed by the students, all in the spirit of giving them an opportunity to build on their professional ambitions to get into the industry. Many of them come from industry into our program, and then we'll be transitioning out. Something tells me they want a job in about 4 or 5 weeks, so we're still working on that as graduation comes fast and furiously. The original iteration of this was done on the University of Oregon campus. In fact, for the first 10 years or so, we did it on campus and really felt at that time it was really about giving the students that level of access to the industry. But as we began to think about how we could grow and make this stay boutique but be more important and more useful to the state of Oregon, which is our mandate as a university of the state of Oregon, was to bring it up here to Portland, take advantage of this wonderful facility at White Stag. And there's about half of you in this room that are up from Eugene today, and the other half of you are from mostly here in Portland. And special to see so many familiar faces from Portland, as well as we have many of our alumni now who are active participants in the world of sport business here in the city of Portland. As Christina said, we're always very fortunate to put together a great team of people to talk to you today, and I think the format allows for some really interesting conversation, hopefully interactive, during the first portion of the session, and then we'll transition to a networking hour. So hope you guys can stick around and take advantage of some hospitality on our part and a chance to meet hopefully some new friends and colleagues and build your network, which is a key ingredient to your success, even if you're not or are in the industry right now. So without further ado, let me introduce our moderator. I'm a big fan of just saying that there's a long bio and a program that you can refer to, and I'll just add a few extra comments about Ellen Devlin. Ellen, as you will read, has a long and distinguished career as an executive with a small shoe concern based in the Beaverton area behind a large grassy berm. I think you guys know who that is. Most impressively, in my mind, has shown a degree of passion for this industry across so many different initiatives, and you can read about it as well, and she'll hopefully speak to it as well. Her most recent project, a documentary that will be making its debut here in the coming months, surrounding the start of the U.S. track and field trials at Eugene in 2012, June 22nd through July 1st. She has a connection to the trials as well, competing in the 1980 U.S. Olympic trials as a member of the University of Oregon track and field program. So long and distinguished career, and now a role of moderator here for our panel today. So ladies and gentlemen, Ellen Devlin.
Thank you. So good to see everybody. How's the drive up from Eugene? It's raining down there too? They were supposed to have a nice weekend though. Hey, so we have an incredible panel here for you, and I think that all of you have seen the bios. And we're going to spend the next hour getting to know these four incredible people. And we're going to start by having each of them tell us a little bit about themselves. And I know that most of you are sitting in a position where you're more at the beginning of your career. So I want them to tell you a little bit about how did they get into the sports business, kind of any skills that they felt that served them well. And then a question that I know that Paul Svangard wants us to ask, and that, did education make any difference in your career in the sports business? So we're going to go one by one on the career, and that would be about the first 10 minutes. And then we've got 4 themes of questions that we're going to be asking. The first is that around the Olympics. We've got some experts up here that know a lot about those events. We have an upcoming Olympics happening in London, so we're going to spend a little bit of time looking at the Olympics through the lens of women's sports and through the lens of international sports. Next, we're going to look specifically at women's sports and talk about what's going on around the world. Obviously, a lot of us have a view of what that looks like in the United States, but we've got some experts up on the stage that have a good view of what that looks like around the world. Next, we're going to talk just specifically about global sports business. So many of the companies that you're going to join are not just USA companies, they're not just German companies located in Beaverton, they're global businesses. So we'll be discussing that. And then finally, we're going to talk about the area of cause marketing and what does that area look like now in the sports business and why is that area so important in this business today. So that will take us about an hour. And then we're going to open it up for questions. So you guys will have about 20 minutes to ask the panelists questions. So as we're discussing and you think, oh my gosh, Ellen never asked that question, write it down and you can ask it, okay? And then we'll have somebody walking around with a microphone so that you can ask your question. So we just ask you to stand, introduce yourself so everybody knows who you are, and then ask your question for the panel. And if you want it directed at a specific person, then to direct it at that person. So we're going to start with Stuart James. Stuart is the head of Asia Pacific for Helio Partners. And rather than introducing Stuart, he is going to do that for you. So Stuart?
Yeah. Thank you. I'm most recently the head of Asia Pacific for Helios Partners in China. I'm based in Beijing. At the moment, we handle 3 main clients. We do Major League Baseball in China, and we handle Arsenal Football Club from the UK, all their commercial activity, and we do some promotion marketing for the WTA. We're actually owned by a French company called the Amore Group and the Warsaw Sports Organization. And you may not be familiar with them, but you're probably familiar with 2 of their events. And they own the Tour de France and the Dakar Rally. So we also handle those properties for China. I came to China about 9 years ago, and I was actually primarily doing music concerts and some sports promotion. Worked with Manchester United, bringing them to China. I also, for 2 years, headed up China's America's Cup program, sailing. And and before that, I lived in Los Angeles for a number of years as a NFL agent. So I know there's a bit of a leap there, but it'd take me too long to explain that to you right now.
So before I let you go, Stuart, talk to us a little bit about your education and how that got you into the sports business.
Sorry?
Your education?
I have an MBA from Hofstra University, and I studied marketing communications before that. I've been involved in sports actually since as long as I can remember. My father played professional football in England, and I went to university as a sports information. Actually, I had a scholarship and paid for my school by working in the sports information department. And then I actually went to grad school because I coached lacrosse. So, yeah. It's a long time ago.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you, Stuart. That's wonderful. Okay, next up is Micky Lawler. She is also your keynote speaker tonight. She is the head of Octagon Tennis. Micky, welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having us. It's a real privilege to speak to the next generation of leaders in the sports community. I came to Octagon in 1988, before you guys were probably born. And I started out my career at Octagon coming from the ATP. It was called the MIPTC back then, which was the men's tennis circuit. I was the press attaché there and traveled 48 weeks out of 52 with 32 beautiful different men every week. And We stayed at the best hotels in the most beautiful cities on earth, and I got to know all sides of the tennis business because as the press attaché, you had to write the tournament report, and that involved sponsorship, media, fans, TV, and so then I was hired by Octagon, which at the time in 1988 was called Advantage International. It was headquartered in Washington, D.C., and I was hired to start the Paris office. I was there for about 6 months, and then I was moved to London, and I was in London for 4 years. But it was very significant for Advantage or for any sports management company to hire a woman at the time, and it took them 9 months to make the decision to go for it because a lot of the partners thought, this is really a big leap of faith. And so they went for it, and I was very lucky to, as soon as I walked into the door, I had a very good friend whose name was Alberto Mancini, and he was 19 years old, and he became the top, he was top 10, top 8 pretty much right away, and that's very unusual in our business. So he was the hottest thing in tennis at the time, and I had the honor of representing him. So we were at a tournament in Rome that he had won the Italian Open, and somebody from a competing agency said, "Why are you represented by a woman?" And so he made a very nice remark, and that really gave me the confidence to keep going in this business, which at the time was not easy to do. I was also alone in the office in Paris, and then moved to London, as I said, and moved to the States in 1992. I now head up the tennis division. We've got about 60 athletes that we represent, and we take care of 17 events around the world. As a company, we represent about 500 athletes, and we have 75 offices around the world. We employ about 1,500 people, and then Octagon has a broader role in corporate sponsorship and on the events side of the business. So we've been instrumental in shaping the direction of the business, and we're thankfully hanging in there in challenging times since 2008. But it's all about evolution and revolution and moving ahead with the times. So very fortunate to have been given that chance.
Thanks, Micky. Just one question. I noticed on your resume that you speak 5 languages. And so oftentimes the students ask me, how important is having a second language or another language from your first language in this business?
Well, for me, it's been key, and it's been a big part of who I am, because I spent my youth traveling. We lived in many different countries, and I'll tell you about that a little bit later. But I think that was the reason why I was hired, because I didn't compete in any Olympic trials, and I'm not a 3-time Iron Woman or any of these things. I was always big into sports, and I do come from a family of athletes. But the languages, we moved to South America, so I speak Spanish and German, French, English, and Dutch, and a little bit of other things. That's very helpful because we are a global business, and it makes a big difference when you can speak to, especially an athlete, in their own language. And I have a funny story to tell you that when the Russian players first came out and competed internationally, there was one player called Chesnikov who spoke Russian and hardly spoke English, and I didn't speak any Russian, and I was still working for the ATP. And I would be in charge of the press conferences, so I would sit next to him, and he won this tournament in Orlando, and so the American press started asking him questions about his win and his game and whatever, and then my English was the English he'd become accustomed to hearing, so he would ask me, so what did they say? And I would repeat in English what they said. And then the journalist said to me, can you ask him in Russian? And, and everybody had this perception that I was speaking to him in Russian, which I wasn't. But even if for a Russian, because I was a foreigner, I was more accessible and less intimidating than the Americans, I think. So You know, it just makes you more sensitive to other cultures, I guess, and you know. So yes, to answer your question, it was a big help. It is a big help.
Thanks, Micky. Okay, next up is Rebecca Perez, and she's going to tell you a little bit about her passion and her background in global sports business as a professional. Rebecca?
Yes, so I'm absolutely thrilled to be here, and Micky couldn't have said it better. I mean, what an inspiring group of people here, and the future of sports business in this country. So I'm thrilled. Thank you for the opportunity. I really like, Micky, what you said about the multicultural aspect of sports, and I would say that's probably what enabled me to get into the world of sports. Really, I was at the right person at the right place at the right time. It was completely luck. Through networking, I started talking to some people at Meridian, which was the marketing agency of the IOC. And I'm from Europe. I speak several languages also. The two official languages of the Olympic movement are English and French. And having grown up in France, I could speak French and nobody else in the Atlanta office could. So I literally had an interview, and 20 minutes later when I had the key in my door, had an offer. So I really think that the multicultural and language aspect is key in the global sports world. So I'm from France. I went to business school in France, and that enabled me to come to the U.S. I came to the U.S. and went to Georgia Tech a few years back, got my MBA, and I did not start out to work in sports. I didn't even know that you could work in sports. I was very much inspired by sports and the Olympics. In fact, I volunteered for the Atlanta Olympics. I was in security. And it was a great experience, and it was great to see behind the scenes and to be part of it, and to really feel that you're enabling the event to take place. And actually, every Olympics that I've been to since, which is from Salt Lake through to Vancouver, well, Singapore, if you count the Youth Olympics, I've always made a point of sharing that experience with all the volunteers that I've met, because they really have to work hard, and without them, the games couldn't happen. So anyway, I volunteered for the Atlanta Games, and I did fundraising for the international school in Atlanta for a few years, and then through networking, met the people at Meridian and started working with them. So Meridian was the official agency of the IOC and handled all the marketing. So selling, packaging the rights, all the commercial rights around the world, and then selling them to the sponsors, and then managing that. So I started working there in 2001. I started in marketing communications, and then grew into a role of account management and overseeing all of the commercial uses of the marks. So a lot of education to the organizing committees, to the sponsors, to the broadcasters, the licensees. Again, people, cultures all over the world, and it was definitely fascinating and a lot of hard work, a lot of headaches, but definitely worth it. After Beijing, I was ready to do something else, and so I moved to San Francisco and worked for Visa, and I was managing their Olympic sponsorship. So, and everything that fell under their Olympic sponsorship. So the IPC sponsorship of the Paralympics, USA Track and Field, gymnastics, swimming, and ski and snowboard. So.
Thank you, Rebecca, very much. Okay, next up, Amanda Tucker is the Global Director of Business Development at Nike Live Strong. And I think, Amanda, you haven't been doing that very long. So tell us a little bit about you.
Well, first of all, it's just great to be here with this group of people. I could just listen to these stories all day long, but I guess I need to contribute something. And thanks for organizing this. It's always great to do something with the University of Oregon, especially considering the close kindred spirit with Nike. Having said that, I did think very carefully about the color of my sweater today, and I'll let you think about that a little bit. In answer to your question, Ellen, I've been working with Nike Live Strong for about a month now. I've been at Nike for almost 13 years. I started when I was 10, so that's why I, have been there that long. But I started actually in the manufacturing side of the business. I have a kind of a strange background, in a sense, for working in the sporting goods industry because I never really planned on it. I actually was thinking more in the vein of foreign service, and I did my undergraduate work at Stanford. And yes, we may be back for a Rose Bowl. I'll stop the Stanford comments. But I went after my undergraduate studies overseas first to Paris, and I was studying political science and public policy, and then to Belgium, where I was studying the European Union. This was at the time when the single market was being formed, and I was very interested in working kind of in that public policy space. And my first job was working for a non-for-profit representing U.S. companies and international organizations. And I did that for about 5 years, principally working on European Union policy and international labor issues. And from there, I went to actually back to Switzerland to work for the UN, one of the specialized agencies of the UN, the International Labor Organization. And I began working on international labor issues, and specifically on child labor issues, working to remove children from hazardous employment situations and getting them into better opportunities. And through that, my first project while I was working at the ILO was in the sporting goods industry, actually, with the production of soccer balls in Pakistan. And you guys probably are too young to remember that back in like 1997, there was an uproar over the production of soccer balls, and we can go into that a little bit later, but I was working with that industry to try to resolve that, and also with a number of the sporting goods companies, including Adidas and Nike. And I, through those contacts and through that situation, was approached first by Adidas and then later by Nike to come work full time to set up corporate responsibility programs. And I wasn't as excited when Adidas came and didn't take that, but was very excited when Nike came around because I'm from the Pacific Northwest. And another little known thing, Ellen, I don't even think I told you this, but as a junior I played tennis. And I actually wrote to Nike for sponsorship for shoes, and I was rejected. So I thought, finally, I'm going to get, I'll be able to get in some Nike shoes. So I left the UN and came to work for Nike, helped to start our corporate responsibility compliance group. And we can talk a little bit about that, because I think when we think about the sporting goods industry leading in terms of social change, you can look at the social marketing and the cause-related work, which I think the sporting goods industry really sets the benchmark there, but I also think we do that on the manufacturing side, so we can talk a little bit about that as well. I worked with Nike in terms of the corporate responsibility area for about 5 years. Then I went overseas to Vietnam, where I was our general manager overseeing manufacturing. I had the opportunity to work with Ellen, who we overlapped a little bit when she was also general manager. And then after doing that for about 3 years, I went back to school at age 40. And now you realize that my math did not add up earlier, to do a mid-career program at Stanford Business School. So, when we talk about the role of education, I think education is a lifelong commitment. I don't think it's like you finish your education and you're done. I think, the ability to continue to learn, to want to do new things, to take on new challenges is something you should really think about, just keeping that as a priority for your lives from now forever, and it doesn't really matter what age you are. So I did that. I went back to a position overseeing our sustainable manufacturing performance teams, managing the teams of Nike people around the world, working with our factories. And then within the last kind of year period, I just wanted a little bit of a new challenge to try to learn a bit different part of the business. I'm very passionate about Livestrong and what that group is doing, and so I made a jump over to work with the Livestrong group as the global director of business development, and basically I'm working primarily on trying to expand the Livestrong brand internationally.
Perfect. Thank you. Wow. Huh? We got a great panel here. Hey, we're going to start, because with sport as a global business, we're going to start with a global sports business question. And I'm going to serve this up, and Stuart's going to take it first, and then the rest of you can contribute. So, Stuart, the question is, does marketing of sports change in different countries and in different cultures?
Oh, for sure. I think there are so many factors that go into marketing anything, whether it's cars or sports, and you have to adjust based on people's perceptions and preconceived ideas. And, you know, and some people like basketball more than football, or baseball more than soccer, and sometimes you're introducing new sports, and sometimes you have people from that country who have achieved a high level at a certain sport, so it tends to be easier. China is very nationalistic, so you put a Chinese flag on just about anything, and the whole country will watch. You know, I was telling you earlier that during the Women's World Cup, I think it was 2003, and China made the final. Every TV in China was tuned in to those games. Every TV. Lena went to the French Open. Everybody was watching, and everybody was supporting. You know, it's often a challenge for rights holders to market in international territories, particularly like for Arsenal. We have fans in Arsenal, fans of Arsenal in China, and we have a pretty good fan base, but it's a casual fan base. They like to watch it on TV, but they don't actually participate. And some of that is they just don't know how. They're too removed. They know that when Arsenal plays Tottenham, it's a big rivalry, but they don't really feel it in their heart. They know it because we tell them, but they don't totally understand the passion if you lived in North London and the feeling, you know, I'm from New York, I hate Philadelphia. I want to beat Philadelphia in anything. But they don't get that. And I think you know, we spend a lot of time with Arsenal Football Club trying to teach fans about the culture. We actually started a program for Chinese college students going to college in the UK where they can intern for Arsenal. We have 3 at any given time. And they come to the training grounds 2 or 3 times a week, and they come to every game. But they cannot write about the game, and they cannot write about the players. All they write about is the experience, the culture. And to tell you a quick story about how well that worked for us, the second game we did this was last season, and it was a Champions League game against Barcelona. And the student we had was actually a PhD student studying in London, and he was not a football fan. And outside of the public opinion, he didn't really like London very much, because although everyone was friendly, they were polite. They weren't open and warm to him. He felt like an outsider. And for whatever reason, the media director at Arsenal decided that instead of having him sit in the media room, they gave him a ticket and asked him to go sit with the fans. And we won the game, surprisingly. But when Arsenal scored the winning goal, 2 very large, and he pointed out they were very large, fat large, men were jumping up and down screaming that they had scored a goal and the winning goal against Barcelona. And they grabbed him and started bear hugging him, jumping up and down, celebrating with him. And he said he never felt so at home at London. And that's exactly what we wanted. We wanted to let people know that, yeah, okay, you're on the other side of the world from the club, but it's all one big family. And we just need to sort of pull you into the fold. So I think that is a challenge. I think that media works different. You have to pay a lot of attention to how people get their information. We are moving away from TV in China because it's a little bit too difficult to control. And we're doing a lot more on the internet. And we're finding that a lot of people in China under the age of 30 are getting their information and their entertainment from the internet. So we've been putting a lot of effort in that. Arsenal spends about £250,000 a year just promoting the club on the internet in China. But yeah, I think it's you really have to pay attention to how people respond to things and what bits they're missing.
Okay. So the question is, does marketing of sports, and on your sheet it says, does the marketing of women's sports change in different countries or cultures? So.
Yes, it does. However, I've thought about this one, and I would say 10, 15 years ago, a global sponsorship was very, very difficult to make work because of those differences. I think that's changing drastically because of what Stuart said, the internet. Brands are becoming more universal, global, and universally accepted. But I'll give you an example. When I was growing up, I'll never forget that, and this is not related to sports, but Chevy came out with a car called Nova. And they wondered why the heck it didn't sell in South America, because Nova means Nova. It doesn't go. It doesn't work. So who would buy a car that is called Nova, right? And it was incredible that big companies would miss this sort of thing. So today we've learned a lot more about marketing and about being sensitive. In fact, L'Oreal has a business school in Brazil where they send all of their expats to, before they're sent to their different countries, to become familiar with inherent characteristics of the cultures and the people where they're going. Then on the tennis side, I'll give you one example that's interesting. One athlete, like, I don't know if you guys have heard of Caroline Wozniacki, but she's been #1 in the world. She's from Denmark. And that one athlete, just like Lena in China, can mobilize an entire business. So we've got a tournament in Copenhagen, which is an international tournament, so one of the smaller ones. And that tournament is very, very financially successful because of this one athlete who drives an enormous fan base, TV, sponsorship revenue, and really makes the whole thing work. Now, you know, do you want to do one event that is so dependent on the athlete? You need to partner with the athlete and make it work and be fair to every part. But so to answer the question, yes, but I see this very much changing.
Thank you.
I think in most cases, just like China or Denmark, the best way to tap into people's passion is to tie to somebody that they can relate to. So somebody from your country, somebody from your region. So people will go to see a tennis tournament because there's a Danish tennis star. Very few athletes can transcend that. I mean, Michael Jordan is maybe one of the few. Usain Bolt. But there are a handful. Generally, spectators, people around the world, care about the athletes from where they're from. So you do have to kind of customize based on the culture, the sports, the athletes, based on the country and what region you are. The second thing, I think, I really believe that this is probably not true for the U.S., but for most of the rest of the world, it probably is. Investment in sport really is a political and a government decision. Based on history and culture, different countries will always choose to invest in certain sports and not others. I mean, why are there so many judo Olympians from France? Just because there's always been a culture and investment in judo in France. I couldn't tell you exactly why that is, but there's in grade school, I did judo. I don't know if any of you did here in the U.S. Every country is going to focus on their different areas of passion and culture, and if you want to tap into that through your marketing, you have to connect to those different points.
Good. Thanks, Rebecca. Okay, Amanda, you're going to get our first question on cause marketing. So can you speak to the concepts of using sports for social change? What can sports do for development of countries? How are sports used in solving social issues?
Yes, that's a small subject you've given me that I'll try to break here very quickly. I was talking with Ellen a little bit prior to this, and I think, there's a number of ways you can look at this. One is probably more obvious, and that's this concept of sport as a rallying point, or sport as a source of inspiration. And you look at the number of companies that try to do something with a give back component or impacting communities. And most every company now has some type of corporate responsibility platform or some community investment platform. But in the sport industry, I think we almost have an unfair advantage with this, because there's something so incredibly emotive and raw, and the ability and to connect with people through sport is just incredible. And you see that in just the number of initiatives there are in the sports industry trying to tackle some of the world's thorniest problems. I mean, I just did a quick little search today to try to get me out of my Livestrong box. What else is there out there that's not yellow? And, all of you guys know about Susan B. Komen, Race for the Cure, the Team in Training with the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society, the RED campaign, fighting AIDS in Africa, the NFL Pink campaign, and the Crucial Catch campaign with the American Cancer Society, Athletes for Hope, which was started by 12 prominent athletes in 2007, now has grown to over 1,000 athletes. And what I didn't know and learned today is there's actually now foundations and associations to help athletes figure out what to do about their charitable platform. There's Athletes for Charity, which teams up with professional athletes, sports leagues, and teams to empower and support the development of disempowered youth. And then there's the Athletes Foundation that actually helps athletes to design, establish, and manage their charitable outlets. And a conservative estimate in the United States alone is that there are probably over 400 private foundations and charities connected to professional athletes or teams. And in fact, if you look at the top athletes, almost all of them have some sort of charitable outlet. Now, the key, though, is how many of these are really impactful, how many of them are well run, how many of them are really sustainable. And what you tend to find is some of these things start, but then quickly fail because they don't have really solid management, or once that athlete is sort of retired or maybe isn't as supporting it, it kind of goes by the wayside. So I think one obvious way that sport is making a social impact is through these kinds of events. Another maybe less obvious way, but I think you guys as business students may be more aware of this and certainly can appreciate the value of it, is looking at the sports industry as a leader in terms of facing some of the most complicated social responsibility issues. And since I work for Nike, and you now know that I have a labor background, you're probably already, your brains have already gone to this whole issue of factory conditions and Nike's challenges that we've had over the years. But one thing I'll say for this, and now, before I switched into this new job with Livestrong, I suddenly became quite popular with some of our friends in the electronics industries that were experiencing some of the same challenges and were, calling a lot to us and to others in our industry, because, we were really at the forefront of trying to think about how do you manage a complex global supply chain. The sporting goods industry, I think, should be very proud of the position it took. And not just Nike, but Adidas as well, Reebok, Timberland, Patagonia. I mean, these are all companies that took a leadership position on this, either from a labor standpoint or from an environmental standpoint, because there's something about, our industry that wants to set the benchmark in terms of environmental and social practices. And really, I think that is a way that maybe you wouldn't naturally associate with the sporting goods industry, but it's definitely something that is making a difference, not only for the sporting goods industry, but for other industries that are looking to see what we did, as early as 10, 15 years ago, and certain prominent companies are just now looking at some of those issues. So those are two things that come to my mind when you ask that question. What can be done in terms of rallying people behind major social causes? And the other is, the work that the sporting goods industry has done collectively in the area of corporate social responsibility.
Thanks, Amanda. Micky, I noticed on your resume that you've done quite a bit in the area of maybe not cause marketing, but certainly giving back in that area for sports. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, sports obviously offers a great platform on which to build a community message. First of all, the inherent characteristics of being a good sportsman or woman involve having great values and looking after each other and being good to society. In tennis, at the WTA, we formed a partnership with UNESCO to create more awareness in developing countries and have women become more equal to men. That's been, I would say, somewhat successful. As Amanda says, a lot depends on the way that the organization works. And a UNESCO, part of the UN, is a huge organization and doesn't run as streamlined as a Livestrong. I think Livestrong is the best example of a successful, it runs like a train and it's done amazing things. And Susan G. Komen as well. Then we've also done things with St. Jude, which is a pediatric cancer research hospital in Memphis. And they partnered with a tennis event in Memphis, raised $6 million in a very short amount of time. And St. Jude's has an international outreach program, because to treat a sick child in the U.S. costs about $100,000, and to treat kids in El Salvador, for example, for $100,000, you can treat 100 kids. So it was much more efficient to train doctors and nurses overseas. And so we tried to do that and have each tournament in each city partner with a hospital. But again, you need all of the pieces to really work. And the more complicated the setup is, the more likely it is that it's going to fail. So I think, again, Livestrong is perfect because it started with the yellow bracelets, and they were the super trendy thing to have. They were cost 10 cents to make. You sold gazillions of them, and that was a great start. And it just launched this incredible 84 million. And I remember. And then if you bought a bracelet, you had to register online. And I think I bought my first ones, 10 years ago? And you're still getting emails from the Livestrong Foundation, and it just runs. You can't say the same thing for larger organizations. So it's not easy to do, but yeah, we've done quite a bit of work with St. Jude's and UNESCO. And Habitat for Humanity also, which was a sponsor initiative that was with Whirlpool. So the other thing, very quickly, I'll tell you is that if you do, for example, on the WTA tour, Whirlpool had this cause with Habitat for Humanity, and then the whole discussion between sponsor and WTA in this instance becomes much more about a partnership, because you're working hard for a very large goal together. So it's much more about the bigger goal than about how many millions of dollars are you investing in my property. So it breaks down the walls of client and sponsor.
Great, thanks, Micky. Okay, we're going to change to the next topic of Olympics, and I think Rebecca knows that this ball is going to be served to her. And the rest of you can comment on it. So we're all going to London in July and August, if we got our tickets. Tell me a little bit, or tell us, what do you hope that the Olympics will do for sports this year?
Well, first off, there's going to be a new event in London. Women's boxing will be at the Olympics for the very first time. So that's really exciting. and it's really helping promote women's sport and putting women at the same level as men. The statistic I've seen is that 47% of the athletes will be female, which is great. And considering that when the Olympics first started back in ancient times, there were no women. We've really come a long way. I was looking up some statistics. 40 years ago, for the games in Munich, 14% of the athletes were women. So really, I think a lot of positive strides have been made in that regards. I think for London, there's three hopes for me. My first is probably a lot of you have heard about the controversy about 3 countries that currently do not follow the rules of the Olympic Charter and don't have any women on their team, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and Bahrain. Saudi Arabia actually had unofficially an athlete at the Singapore Olympic Games, Youth Olympic Games. Her name is Dalma Malhas, and she paid her own way. She brought herself on her own, invited by the IOC, to the Singapore Youth Olympics, competed in equestrian, and won a medal for Saudi Arabia. She got a bronze medal, so the first women's medal for Saudi Arabia, which is a big deal. Yet that NOC is still kind of trying to decide if they're going to bring women to London or not. So I really hope that they get their act together and that they do bring some women, as do Qatar and Bahrain. I think that those 2 countries will probably follow Saudi Arabia's lead. Qatar is really interested. They had very successful Asian Games in 2006, and I think they're really interested in carrying more weight in world sport. So this is going to have to be a part of it. My second hope for London is for more women to be in the world of sports. There's about 105 members of the IOC. 20 of them are women. The directors of the IOC, there are no women. There used to be one, Giselle Davis, who was director of communications, but currently there are none. So I think the IOC, the Olympic Charter, obviously is values and things to aspire to, and it's always a work in progress. And I think this is a really good opportunity for the IOC to work on that and to get more women within its organization. And more generally, not just in the IOC, but to have more representation in administration of sports by women. And lastly, I mean, of course, this is what the Olympic Games are about, is I hope that London will aspire people, girls, women, to do sports, to respect the values, the Olympic values, respect others, teamwork, collaboration, excellence, joy and effort, all of these things, all of these human qualities that everybody can benefit from.
Excellent. So, Stuart, I want to bring you into the Olympic discussion because I think the last Olympics were in China in 2008. I want you to tell me a little bit about what do the Olympics do for a country. China, a very developing country, and London, a very developed country. So what do the Olympics do for a country, and how does that change if the country is developed or if the country is not developed?
Sure. Well, the Olympics in Beijing probably first and foremost help develop the infrastructure of the city because they had to do so much to prepare the city in terms of subway systems and new hotels and international restaurants and venues. I mean, the Bird's Nest is a very good venue. And compared to what we used to play in the Worker Stadium, which is kind of an iconic venue, but it's really old and it's not very comfortable and there's no concessions. And, you know, the basketball arena was way outside the city, and now we have a beautiful basketball arena in the city, the MasterCard Center. So I think infrastructure was one. I think it also helped, for the Beijing Olympics, it was a coming out party. It was to let the world know that China was now on the world stage. And I think it's going to be the same thing for Brazil. It's a footprint to say, hey, we can do this. and we can host all of you, and it's going to go well, and nothing bad's going to happen, and you're going to learn about our culture, and you're going to learn about our great country, and we've arrived, we're here. I think that happened. Beijing did it very, very well. China did it very well. I think related to women's sports in China, at the moment we don't have a lot to compare to because the women do very well and the men do very bad at most team sports. So China's very passionate about their women's sports. They love the women's football team and they love women's volleyball, and they tend to turn the other way when the men play. Because they're a little bit, the China men are already eliminated from the 2014 World Cup. They didn't even get past the first round. And the fact that North Korea goes to the World Cup and China doesn't is a big issue. Is a really big issue. So I think the Olympics and international competition has provided an equal playing field for women. I think the Women's World Cup and the Japan winning this past time around was a fantastic statement. I think Japan really needed that to happen. And I think it was a wonderful game, and I think everyone rallied around them, and I don't think gender ever played a part in it. They represented the country, and it was a big moment, and it was a big win. And I think that, in sports, you said this just before, people become so passionate about it that they forget all the other things they used to think about it. I think that we've seen that in race. We've seen it with gender. We're now seeing it with physical disabilities, with the Blade Runner going to London. I think the passion of it wipes out all your other preconceived ideas, and then you can rethink. And I think the Olympics, particularly because it's a global event and because everything's sort of on an equal playing ground, and it provides a better stage than some other things.
Thank you, Stuart. Any other comments on the Olympics? Okay. All right. So we are going to go to women's sports. And Micky, we're going to start with you. I think here in the United States, Title IX, which was the amendment to the Civil Rights Act of 1968, passed 40 years ago this year. And so we've seen equality and participation in sports in the United States, but we're not necessarily seeing equality in spectators or sponsorships or the media. Do you think that will ever change here in the United States? This should be something you guys all want to talk about.
Yeah, it's a very interesting question. I think it is, this year you look at the Final Four, and I think it is changing. At the NCAA level, regardless of gender, the two revenue-generating sports are football and basketball. I know that they want to standardize all 89 championships, and they have big hopes for the other sports and obviously for women. So we've come a very, very long way, even though it doesn't seem, we're not where we should be, obviously, but it is about revenue and it's about product. And I work in a sports where women and men are equal, so tennis is by far the #1 professional sport for women. And I think the reason for this is that tennis combined men and women at the Grand Slams, and the Grand Slams are the pillars of the sport. And that platform produced really interesting stories. So, for example, when I was growing up, Chris Evert was engaged to Jimmy Connors, and they were the big champions. And Martina Navratilova was defecting out of Czechoslovakia because, there was a big difference between East and West. And these were just fascinating romance novels that were behind these athletes that you saw on TV. So it's a little bit of what Dancing with the Stars and X Factor and those TV shows, it is the ultimate reality show that they do when they introduce a stranger to you on television, and they show that, I broke my ankle, but I persevered and I'm dancing the foxtrot. Nobody cares about the foxtrot, but you learn about these people and you get sucked into their stories. So I remember in the 80s or 70s even that Martina and Chris were playing the Wimbledon final, and the commentator, who was a Belgian commentator, actually said at break point, you know, like almost to win the match or something, Martina is focused. She is thinking about the dress that she's going to wear at the Wimbledon ball tonight. And Chris is hoping that she's going to get to dance with Jimmy Connors, who's going to play the final against Arthur Ashe, and, you know, this kind of stuff. And I remember thinking, is this guy totally crazy? Does he really think that that's what they're thinking? Never in a million years would the commentator have made those stupid comments when the men were playing. So, you know, I think of that, and now I see that women and men are getting equal prize money, and that's amazing, right? Now still, and please don't ever repeat that I said this, if you watch the Australian Open final, the men and the women, completely different. But the entertainment value that's been created is incredible for the women. So yeah, so the final was much better. The men's match was also legendary between Nadal and Djokovic, and it lasted, you know, 19 hours and so on and so forth. The women was done faster, and so no comparison from a performance standpoint, but from a performance standpoint, the women are getting incredible and better and better and better. And also, you know, you have to think back 20 years ago, in many, many countries, men would think that women with muscles were very unattractive. So, you know, women, in fact, did the anti-workouts. So, you know, so much has changed. It will change, but, you know, it takes a while. Be patient. You guys will make it change.
So let's see, I'd say for any of you, this next question, and we're going to stay on the same theme of women's sports. What are the challenges today in women's sports, and what is the future of women's sports? And you can answer that from a perspective of here in the United States or any place in the world. I'm serving that to all of you. Stuart, you want to go first?
I'll go last.
I'll take a brief stab at it. I mean, this may seem incredibly futuristic, but when we think about the changes that have been kind of sweeping over the Middle East with the democratization and increasing the voice of people against, you know, political forces, I think that, you know, sport, almost more than any other vehicle, has the opportunity to provide that that vehicle of democratization. And I think one amazing thing that we will see will be the role of women in sport as a way to increase her voice in those countries. And I think, you know, you talk about these examples of countries that still don't have women on their Olympic teams. I think, you know, it's just a matter of time before they will have. But meanwhile, some of these countries that already, you know, you see much more focus in major sporting events in countries that, you know, haven't had any kind of women representation, that are now bringing women. And I think that that's not only important for the sporting world, I think that's incredibly important for the social and economic development of those countries. So I think that's another example where we can see the vehicle of sport as a kind of a muse for broader social change in a country. And I think that's one of the great hopes I have for the sporting good industry, and particularly for women in that industry.
In the Middle East, in early 2000s, we had the idea to go to the Middle East with a tennis event, and we were told that, yeah, that's great, but the women would have to compete with covered elbows, covered knees, covered faces, and, you know, that was not on. So we went and pressed forward with an international event, again, the smallest level of professional event on the WTA Tour. And in 2008, 9, and 10, in Doha, same country where we began, we held the Women's Year-End Championships, which is the biggest event for women. Now, I'll tell you that during the championships, we were staying at a very fancy hotel, and the matches were at night because it's very hot during the day. So I went to the gym at the hotel, and I was changing to go to the courts because the shower was better at the hotel, and it was in this locker room 100 degrees. And the attendant came to me, and she hands me this cashmere robe, and she says, "You need to wear this while you dry your hair and all of this." And I said, "You're kidding. This is for a locker room for women." I had a towel around, and she said, "No. As respect to your female locker room inhabitants, you need to cover yourself entirely." So, you know, that was frustrating because how absurd was that? Plus, the women in this locker room had the most expensive hair products, makeup, everything that they put all over themselves, and then they covered it up in these black, you know, burqas. So it was quite interesting, actually, to see that. But over time, there were more women in the stands, and you know, the glasses went, so, you know, they have the, I don't know how they can drive, but they do. The glasses came off, and little by little, you know, and then there's a sheikha in Qatar, Sheikha Moza, who is quite a great ambassador for women there. She's very present and very vocal and eloquent, educated. So, you know, that's fantastic to see, but again, a long way to go.
Yeah, actually, I do have an answer now. I think that with the Olympics and with Title IX, which we talked about earlier, we've done a great job of getting the women's participation up and to a more equal level. But I think the next step is trying to figure out how to commercialize it. Because with the exception of women's tennis, women's sports don't make money. And we need to figure out how to change that. I don't have the answer yet, but hopefully you guys will, because you have much more time than I do. But I think that's the next step. I think that, you know, we've got the participation up, we've created awareness, but now we need to figure out how to make money off it, because at the end of the day, this is all the business. And until we do that, that's.
But if I can just speak to that for 1 second, I think companies are really waking up to the buying power of women. And traditionally, it was speaking to the men, investment to the men, soccer, Formula One, you know, those were the big money sports. But companies are understanding that while spectatorship may be divided equally 50-50 men, women, the buying power is at least 75% to 25%. And so it's good that they're waking up to this, because the women buy for themselves, they buy for their men, they buy for their kids. So I am seeing a huge shift in spending. And in fact, the WTA Tour had the biggest sponsorship ever in the history of tennis with Sony Ericsson at 88 million over 6 years. And then the ATP caught up. So actually, and that's why there's equal prize money in tennis, because there's so much value on the sponsorship side, and people are understanding that, hey, you know, we need to speak to women. They're the brains in the, you know.
I think at the moment,
Thank you for admitting that, by the way, so
they
quickly.
have done a great job. But I think we got to get other sports to catch up.
Yeah.
And I would say beyond the commercialism, even though it does fall within that larger envelope, the broadcast, how to put the spotlight. I mean, there are women competing in sports. It's just that we don't hear about it. So how to, you know, make sure that those stories get out. A lot of sponsors, Nike, manufacturers, a lot of companies do a great job with that. Visa does a great job of telling the stories of both men and women competing in sports. But how do we make that story more balanced so that it's not 80 or 70% or whatever the number is men, and make it more 50-50?
Good. Okay, thank you very much. So now it's your turn. So we've got, I think, a mic right here. And so just raise your hand with your question, and we'll get the mic to you and have you stand and ask. And again, if it's directed at the panel, just say the panel. If it's a particular person on the panel, then ask it or tell us, please. So who will go first? Mitzi. I see Mitzi back there.
Hi, my name is Mitzi Ng. I'm a first-year MBA student here at the University of Oregon. And I wanted to ask, who are your mentors in sport and why?
So let's do that for the panel. So your mentors in sports and why? Your mentors in sports and why? Who wants to go first?
So, again, when I was a kid, my grandfather was a professional soccer player. My grandmother was a tennis player. And she would take me to the tennis court, and we would pretend this game. Who do you want to be? I would say I want to be Chris Evert. And really, Chris Evert is only 2 years older than I am. But I want to be Chris Evert. You want to be Chris Evert because she's good looking, and she has painted fingernails, and she wears earrings during her tennis match. But you should not. That's the wrong choice. You should be Billie Jean King. Okay. Because Billie Jean King is going to make sure that you're able to travel in first class when you go on airplanes, and that you're able to succeed in business, and that you don't have to learn typewriting and shorthand. So, there you go, Billie Jean King and my grandmother. And actually a lot of, it continues because there are some amazing athletes. I think Rafa Nadal is an amazing athlete, a person, mentor. The list is endless.
I'm similar to you. My dad played professional football and soccer in England. My brother raced motorcycles. I grew up in the Hamptons in New York. My neighbor was Brian Trottier, the New York Islanders. I just sort of grew up in a culture of sports. So it was sort of I just fell into it. It wasn't, to tell you, when I went to college, it was not my plan. It just sort of happened to be that's where my network was, and it just evolved. It wasn't a plan. In fact, my plan probably would have been to play middle linebacker for the New York Giants, but that didn't work out. So, yeah.
Well, my family probably wouldn't know a rugby ball from a soccer ball. I think the only sport we played as a family, or with family and friends when I was growing up, was pétanque, which is the equivalent of bocce ball. So I can't say I have mentors there. For me, I don't have. First, I think that's a really good question. I don't have one specific person that I consider a mentor. I think there's so many inspiring people. Just like Stuart said, every time I see athletes on the field of play or practicing and working so hard, it's just such an inspiration to overcome the barriers and your limits and to push harder. And there's just so many smart people. I can't believe I'm sitting here with all of these wonderful people that are such an inspiration, and each in their own way.
I had to go last because I was thinking so hard about the question, because I got a little bit, tied on mentor, coach, source of inspiration, but I think I have it clear in my mind now. For me, I have mentors in my professional life that I have a relationship with. I think those people are extremely important to have because they know you at different points of your career. They're able to give you really sound advice, encouragement when you need it, sometimes level setting when you need it. So I have those people in my life and have had those. Sometimes some of them are at Nike, some of them are before my time at Nike, and those are people I consider really my mentors. I have people in my life who are sources of inspiration. Some athletes that I know that, Lance is certainly one of them. Joan Benoit Samuelson is certainly another one who, I just admire their attitude and their tenacity and their perseverance. And those people are sources of personal inspiration to me. And then, on a more personal level, I still enjoy competing, even at my low level these days, but I still enjoy competing and training, and I always, no matter kind of what level I'm participating in, I always have a coach, so, and those people, I'm working with a coach now on my cycling, and it's more, tactical. I'm trying to get from here to here. So I think for me, when I thought about that question, I think what we need to think about is, to be successful, what is it that who are the people I need to put around me? And sometimes those are kind of those long-standing mentor relationships, people that know you across a broad spectrum of your career path. Sometimes you need a particular type of relationship that to fix a certain thing or to get you to the next level. And then I think you need to think about, who are those sources of inspiration that on the days that aren't so easy, you think, okay, that person's doing it, I'm going to get up and follow that example.
Okay, great.
Hi, I'm Lauren Westendorf, and I actually manage women's college basketball at Nike. Right now we're working on a program where we're really trying to develop the next level of assistant coaches in college basketball, and really just kind of thinking about what plays into that, especially in the current landscape, whether it's social media, branding, even just presentation skills, how you present yourself as your own brand. I'd like to ask the panel just kind of what, and this is more for the students in the room as well, like how do we continue as female leaders and also male leaders in the sports industry to cultivate that next generation of female leaders that are coming up? And what would you guys suggest for the students that are in the room?
Who wants to take that first?
Go ahead. All right. Well, I don't know that this is unique to, first of all, I think that's a great question. I don't think it's unique to the sporting, or at least the way I'm answering this isn't necessarily unique to the sporting good industry, but it is unique to women. And something I thought a lot about while I was back in business school and have continued to do a little bit of looking into. And the fact of the matter is, for whatever reason, women do not do as good of a job as mentoring other women, or at least they're mentoring other women in a way that's different than the way men are mentoring men. And I'm going to try to explain that, because you might think, wow, that's a broad generalization there. But if you look, and there's been a lot of research on this that we can talk about later, if you look at the way that men often relate to younger men, a lot of times they're kind of looking at that person who's going to be the next person and finding opportunities to give them exposure so that they can, move up, essentially. A lot of times what women are working on when they're working with another woman tends to be, their awareness and developing their soft skills, and it's not necessarily always trying to get them exposure to get to the next position. So I think as women leaders and male leaders working with women that you want to develop, we need to do a little bit of both. We need to find ways to increase skills in the workplace, but we also need to look at promotional opportunities and ways to give visibility to women. And we need to be very, very aware of our intent in doing that, because if we want women to step into these positions of leadership, we have to, of course, give them visibility to people who would notice that. And sometimes that just doesn't happen as naturally for women, unfortunately, as it does for men. And sometimes women mentors are kind of complicit in that because they're focusing more on soft skill and awareness rather than let's think about how we get this person the visibility to get to the next position.
I would agree with that. The first thing that comes to mind, being in a minority as a woman in a leadership position in sports, is that it's an advantage, if you will, because you're sort of in an exclusive group. And a lot of women in that situation like that situation. So they're quite territorial and not too kind to one another, unfortunately. And it's a very competitive world, so you have to teach these women to really be kind to one another and to make them understand the responsibility that they have to educate the everything that comes behind them. the mother instincts need to be kicked in. And I would say that, are there specific skills? Of course, but any kind of skill really can be applied in sports, because you need PR, you need marketing, you need finance, you need IT, you need management. So the important thing, what differentiates one superstar from another, is character, and to really focus on that. So, what makes good character is a lot of virtues, being empathetic, being honest, working hard, and all of these things that we take for granted. And now in this virtual world where we can become anything we want, and we sort of distance. There can be a very big distance between who you really are and who you are on this screen. It's dangerous, and so that's the biggest danger that I see in younger people, is just we need to come back to earth here and really focus on values.
I agree with what you both said, but what I found interesting is I in China, I've actually preferred to hire women. I just had better luck with them. And I tend to do what you said, and I like to pass credit around, and I try to find opportunities for them to move up or do other things. But what I have found is that the reaction when I recommend a woman for a job has not been as positive as if I recommend a man. If I have I just had a young man work for me. He moved on to a social networking company. It was really easy. I said, Jonathan's really good, and he's great, and he's worked with Arsenal for a long time, and I think he'd be great with you, and they hired him like that. And I did a similar thing for a woman who worked for me, and she was actually a better employee, and I could not get her placed. Every time I moved her around, people would say, okay, well, you have anybody else? And I'm like, but she's really good. And I think it's a bit of a culture problem in China. And maybe it's not. Maybe I've been in China too long, but I do think there's a bit of a culture issue. But the reaction hasn't been the same. So I think that's a problem.
Okay. Pat, I saw your hand up there.
So I'm Patrick Hawes. I'm a second-year MBA student at the Warsaw Center. The question I have is actually getting back to a topic that we talked about earlier, Ellen, but I want to go into more depth about the Olympics and something I'm personally very excited about, which is the quadrennial following the Olympics. So we're talking about getting into Russia and Brazil. And so, Rebecca, this actually question is directed towards you, but I would like the whole panel to answer if you have an opinion. But what I'm really excited to see is how the next two Olympics will establish Russia and Brazil as kind of global leaders in the business of sport. And as these are two cultures that are both really empowering to women, Russia is very big into women's basketball. And then in Brazil, there's Marta, who's a soccer player, who's like a national hero in Brazil. And then women's volleyball is also huge in Brazil. So it's two cultures that are very empowering to women. So I was hoping to get a sense of how you thought maybe women's sports would play a role in establishing those two cultures as global leaders in the business of sport.
Well, first I think there's going to be, just like there's a first-time new event for women in London, there's going to be a first-time new event for women in Sochi, which is women's ski jumping. So, I mean, that's just a huge contribution. Russia, Moscow can't take credit for it specifically, but it's happening there, and I think it'll be really a key part of what makes Sochi special. I think both Brazil and Russia are really huge, I'll call them emerging markets, emerging regions for the world of sports. Sports very developed, certain sports are very developed in both of those areas, but I think that the Olympics will really help develop a whole arena of other sports that are not necessarily very popular or well known in those areas. And by hosting an Olympics, the host country actually qualifies to every single event. So Brazil is right now investing in sports where maybe they've never had anybody compete in the Olympics before. I couldn't tell you what that is specifically, but they will have men and women in every event at those games. Russia, the same thing for Winter Olympics. So there's a huge investment going in those countries to develop sports, all sports, for men and women.
Okay, all right. I think Caroline?
I'm Caroline Wood, second year Warsaw student. This one's directed at Amanda, but once again, if anybody else has input. You've been a part of some pretty successful nonprofit organizations. Livestrong is, kind of the highlight. What do you think is the most important factor in having a nonprofit that becomes a success like Livestrong? Is it having someone like Lance Armstrong backing it? Is it the people that work there? What is the most important factor that gets it to a point that Livestrong is at?
That's a good question. Because I've been a part of a lot of different, not-for-profit, and some of them have been sports-related and some of them aren't. Livestrong is very unique because it has an iconic sports figure, and I think Lance is somebody that transcends cultures to a large extent. It also appeals to an issue that affects so many people. I mean, you guys may or may not be aware that at this point in time, cancer has progressed to the point that one out of 3 people will be diagnosed with cancer at some point in their lifetime, and there's at least, and this is a very conservative estimate, at least 28 million people across the globe that are, living with cancer or cancer survivors. So it's something that, if we did a quick roll call here, everybody would know somebody impacted with cancer. And then, of course, you bring that and you bring the power of sport with that, and you harness that, and you harness that with somebody like Lance, who won the Tour de France 7 times, and you have kind of a magic combination. Having said that, the not-for-profit world is really not that different in many respects from the business world. I think what is really important and to develop, and this is why a lot of not-for-profits don't make it, is they've got a great idea, a lot of passion, a lot of energy, but at the end of the day, you've got to really make this thing work. And so the key essentials that make a not-for-profit successful are the same things that make a business successful, and that's clear direction, a strategic plan, clear process, and a lot of that is maybe not as sexy, but that has to get done. And it was I was kind of smiling when you were saying that it works like a train, because I was thinking of the number of, I was wondering, well, is it Amtrak or is it like the TGV? Because it's different trains completely. And there's days that were more like, the TGV, and there's other days that were more like Amtrak. But you've got to have people that are committed to working through those obstacles. When you have something that brings together all of those elements, though, you're in a much better starting place. And I think that's something that's made the Livestrong group so successful, is that combination of ingredients. Did that answer your question?
Yes, well, on behalf of the Warsaw School, I think we've run out of time. And we appreciate the excellent questions that came to the panel, and thank you very much for this esteemed panel being here today. So thank you.
Sorry, I should have been quicker to be ready for you. Thank you, Ellen, for being our moderator. We're going to give our panelists a chance to exit the stage in whatever casual or non-casual way. Stuart, don't make a scene. And I'm going to have Micky come over here for just a moment. We're going to have some remarks here from Micky to conclude our event before we have a chance to move into the networking portion of the event. Not just yet. I've come to learn, and I'll use this as a bit of a segue. We had the opportunity to have Micky join us for a wonderful event down in Indian Wells, California last month for our second annual Warsaw-Thurston Award dinner and gala. I think you spent the bulk of all of our 1-hour cocktail party in the main room practicing your speech. So I've learned that public speaking is it's not your strong suit. Well, I think these folks are a good audience. They're receptive to whatever you have to say, and we'll have you have that chance to say it here in just a moment. But in a little bit of context, 7 years ago, we began a process of incorporating a Woman of the Year award in the symposium, and we began here in Portland by recognizing Val Ackerman, who was the first president of the WNBA and is now involved in USA basketball and has also been doing some consulting for the NHL relative to the start potentially of another team sport in the women's side. I don't like that guy's voice, by the way. He's quite overrated. Is it going to be on the screen? I'll tell you when to play it. Yeah. I'll give you a cue. Okay. She's hid my notes. Can you grab my program roll there? Right underneath there. So we talked about Val Ackerman. Just to run through the award winners: Leanne Daly, former CMO of ESPN; Alana Kloss, who is the CEO of World Team Tennis; Donna Lopiano, who's been a member of our board since the beginning in 1993, who's now a consultant, but many knew her as the president of the Women's Sports Foundation, a leader in advocacy for Title IX; Sue Roden, who galvanized an idea in her head to start a group, Women in Sports and Events, that would provide a mechanism for women to connect in the industry. And then last year, for reasons that you'll see here in a moment on the screen, we recasted the award with the hopes of using it to move our women's initiative forward in a different way. And one of the things that we had noticed over the years was we had a really fortunate time finding fabulous women to join the Warsaw Center, but we really felt that there was another tool we could use to encourage women to enter the business, and that was financial reward. And so we teamed up with two very special families to create the first ever scholarship program in a program like ours to provide women financial support pursuing their degree in the world of sports business. And last year we were very fortunate in our first year to have Stacey Allister, the chairman and CEO of the WTA, be our first recipient, raising more than $50,000 for the scholarship. The endowment now well over 6 figures at $100,000 plus, and is going to begin to pay those dividends that we always dreamed about, to have scholarships to award on an annual basis. And at that evening a year ago, when it was, I think, 85 degrees for the event in 2011, we had the fortune of meeting Micky, and fell in love with her then, and through a lot of people saying there's no other person you could award this to, and you're number 2, we were fortunate enough to get her to agree to join us and be our recipient this year. Those who were at the event will realize that the one parallel to this event tonight is I think the weather was about the same. We had contingency plans in place, but never imagined that in the middle of March in a desert we would have an Oregon rainstorm that we have now since learned that hospitality tents at a tent event in a desert have really good air conditioning, but they don't have a switch that says heat on them. And it was a little bit of a cold night, but we had fun nonetheless. And this was the video that we showed at the event, and it provides a little context on the two names that you see attached to the award. Two very special people, and I will make special mention that we are just a few days away in noting the passing of our founder, Jim Warsaw, who lost his battle with Parkinson's in late April of 2009, and he'd be very proud to be here tonight. So please take a look.
Opportunities for women in the business of sport. Jim Warsaw built his life around the ideals of passion, integrity, and leadership. Born and raised in Southern California, he joined his brother Robert and dad David building sports specialties into the world's leading licensed sports memorabilia company. The brand became synonymous with championship celebrations, as their headwear was always front and center whenever a trophy was handed out. After selling the company to Nike in 1993, Jim launched a new initiative to reinvent sports business education. With a seed gift and a priceless personal Rolodex, he helped the University of Oregon establish the James H. Warsaw Sports Marketing Center. The first program of its kind housed in a college of business, the Warsaw Center has become the industry standard for sports business education and research worldwide. Since 1996, the Warsaw Center has hosted the nation's only academic conference on women in sports business, supporting Jim's tireless efforts to expand opportunities for women in the industry. Beyond Oregon, Jim was also a leading force in the search for a cure to Parkinson's disease, a disease he was diagnosed with in 1993. His fundraising and advocacy work accelerated everything from stem cell research to collaboration among PD scientists. His tenacity and unwavering work ethic inspired all who came in contact with him. Jim passed away due to complications from Parkinson's disease in 2009, but as his friends will tell you, he will leave an indelible impact on generations of sports business leaders to come. Like Jim, Thurston's impact on sports business is still being seen today. The Long Beach, California native spent more than 35 years championing the growth and development of women's professional tennis. Getting her start with the Long Beach Press Telegram, which sponsored the local Virginia Slims tournament, Annalie eventually teamed up with another Long Beach product, Billie Jean King, becoming an integral part of her business team where she promoted and marketed Virginia Slims tennis tournaments in Oakland and San Francisco and worked on the World Team Tennis Pro League. In 1984, Thurston joined Philip Morris USA, where she was a senior consultant to the groundbreaking Virginia Slims Tour. At Philip Morris, she was involved with Virginia Slims event management programs at Wimbledon, the U.S. Open, French Open, Australian Open, and the International Tennis Hall of Fame, and also worked on the Marlboro Auto Racing event program. Thurston moved to the Coachella Valley in Southern California in 2000 to work with the City of Indio as Special Events Coordinator, and later followed as General Manager of the City of Indio Chamber of Commerce. Though she passed away suddenly in 2007, Annalie quickly became the inspiration for future female sports business leaders as family and friends rallied to create the Annalie Thurston Memorial Scholarship at the Warsaw Sports Marketing Center. In becoming the namesake for the first ever dedicated scholarship for a woman pursuing a career in sports business, Annalie now encourages a whole new generation of female sports leaders to make a difference both on and off the court. Our 2012 honoree is a true trailblazer in her own right, but on a global scale. A graduate of the University of Delaware, Micky Lawler began her professional career as part of a foreign language teaching team in Paris, France, where she also served as a professional coach of intercultural business practices. From teacher to practitioner, Lawler transitioned to Advantage International, now Octagon, in 1988, where she played an instrumental role in developing the company's European business and establishing offices in Paris and London. At the age of 27, she became the first woman to manage a top 10 athlete when she worked with Alberto Mancini. She also managed the first Dutch tennis player to win the Wimbledon crown, Richard Krajicek, in 1996. That early success helped Micky become a driving force in strengthening the footprint of women's tennis around the globe. In the early 1990s, she led the effort to introduce women's professional tennis to Latin America, joining the likes of Steffi Graf, Conchita Martinez, Anna Kournikova, Yana Novotná, and Gabby Sabatini on 2 different tours to Chile, Brazil, and Argentina. Micky was also responsible for bringing professional tennis tournaments to countries like Chile, India, Belgium, Denmark, and Holland. A key member of Anna Kournikova's management team, Micky and her colleagues helped drive Anna's success as a global icon and take women's professional sports to a whole new level. As a member of the WTA Board of Directors since 2003, she shared in such milestones as equal prize money in 2007, the first women's professional sports partnership in China, a groundbreaking new media partnership, and the first major women's event in the Middle East. But in a long list of milestones to become one of the sport's most respected global executives, Micky still lists as her greatest accomplishment being the mother of 3 exceptional children, Trevor, Charlotte, and Juliet. We join them in celebrating the remarkable personal and professional achievements of our 2012 Warsaw-Thurston Award winner, Micky Lawler.
Ladies and gentlemen, Micky Lawler.
Thank you so much. You'll appreciate the fact that I'm happy I got a new hairdresser since those, and I learned how to use a brush. Since the evening that we paid tribute to Jim Warsaw and Annalee Thurston in Palm Springs on March 17th, I've actually been on the road nonstop. So it wasn't until this past Monday that I had the chance to look at today's schedule. And I saw my name next to keynote speakers. So to tell you that I broke out into a hot flash is the understatement of the century. And hot flashes are yet another difference between men and women in the business of sports. So I thought, let's take it one step at a time, and let me focus on the panel discussion first and read the bios of my co-panelists. This was a huge mistake. You've now met them and understand how I felt and feel. First, we've got Stuart James, who's head of Asia Pacific for Helios, and he also promoted the Backstreet Boys. He said music, but he didn't say the Backstreet Boys in Shanghai and Beijing. He is a super sailor for the America's Cup, in charge of Team China, and he's perhaps the only foreigner that I know that has succeeded at business in China. Then we've got Rebecca Paris, who is a yoga tennis-playing Olympic ring protector, who went on to head up Visa's Olympic sponsorship and win herself the Sports Business Journal Olympic Award for Olympic sponsorship. Next, we have Amanda Tucker, who is a 3-time Ironwoman, kayaking triathlete, and skier, with more degrees than any other human that I know, 2 of them from Stanford. She's now the head of global business development for Livestrong, which is very appropriate because she is strong. Finally, Ellen Devlin, our moderator. Ellen was a track and field star at Oregon, and of course, as Paul said, competed in the 1980 Olympic trials in the 1500 meters. She worked at every possible division at Nike on the product side, and then became president of the American Chamber of Commerce in Bangkok. She's now producing a future Oscar-winning film called We Grew Wings. Ellen also has 3 kids who she gave birth to with mathematical precision, 2 years apart each. So I asked myself, what am I doing here? The only time I got invited to compete in something, I got disqualified. And I actually have a titanium cage in my back from a bike accident that I suffered in 2002 when I was trying to become a triathlete, and I almost killed myself, but had I succeeded, it would have been a sprint triathlon. So, need I continue? So it's obviously with all of my respect and admiration of my fellow panelists and all of you in the audience that I thank you for listening to my humble story. Sports is a very fascinating topic. Whenever you tell people that you work in sports, their demeanor totally changes and becomes much more open. You work in sports? Holy cow, you must be really cool. Do you think you can get me tickets to Wimbledon? See, that's the downside of the job. The language of sports is universal. When speaking of sports, there's an inherent dichotomy of breaking down geographic barriers and being fiercely protective of them all at the same time. As I said earlier, it's the ultimate reality show engaging passion, emotions, and providing a natural connector between people. Needless to say, this makes the business of sport very interesting. My fortune is inexplicable. I stand here before you as the managing director of Octagon's tennis and global initiatives businesses, and also as a tournament board representative for Asia Pacific on the WTA Tour Board, which is the Women's Tennis Association. These are 2 complementary, very busy, and fantastic jobs. How did I get so lucky? I was born into a Dutch family of athletes, Dutch as in Holland. My father was the Dutch under-18 champion in hurdles in both the sprint and long distances. His father was a soccer player for a first division team called PSV. This was the Philips team, and Philips is the Dutch electronics giant, not Philips Oil, as you know, in this country. In those days, soccer players had real jobs to pay for their salaries, and those jobs were usually for the companies whose team they played for. In addition to working and playing soccer for Philips, my grandfather was a prominent member of the national team, and he believed that the important part of sports was not the competition part, the fun part. It was actually the part that had to do with character and transcending the boundaries of sports to make a real difference to humanity. True to his belief, he used the platform that he'd built as a famous soccer player to put his life at risk by heading up the underground resistance movement in the Amsterdam region during the Second World War. He worked in basements, hidden, sending secret messages to the Allied forces, leaving his family for months at a time. My grandmother at home would receive convoys of Jewish families in the middle of the night, and she would make sure that they were safe, that they were fed and clothed. It was a team effort, they would frequently recount. My father, the hurdler, married my exceptional mother in 1959. They were from totally different backgrounds, Catholic versus Protestant, West versus East. My mom is 5 years older than my dad, and in those days that union was extremely progressive. It still is today, actually. In the footsteps of my grandfather, my father worked for Philips for his entire career. We moved to Colombia, South America, when I was 1. We spent 16 years in 3 different countries of Latin America and 3 in East Africa. After Colombia, we moved to Argentina, and it was there that I had my first truly relevant experience to my own career down the line. It was 1973, and I was 12 years old. We'd become accustomed to living in a very turbulent, violent society in Buenos Aires, Argentina. The rebels were calling for Juan Perón's return to Argentina. He was, of course, the husband of Evita, who many of you probably know. Don't Cry for Me, Argentina. She sang Madonna. Anyway, at the time, anyone who worked for a multinational corporation was a target of the Peronists who wanted to nationalize every business. One Friday evening, our parents went out to dinner. There was a yell from the front gate, and my younger brother, who was 9, brilliantly opened the upstairs window to let the men know, at the front of the gate, that our parents were not home and that we were home alone. I realized immediately that something really bad was happening and ran to get my baby sister and bring my brother down from the window. I covered us with pillows and told my siblings to stay down. The men out front had poured kerosene around our house and then proceeded to set the hedge on fire. We were saved by our neighbors who called the firefighters. But in my 12-year-old mind, it was my quick thinking and bulletproof pillows that actually did the trick and saved us from a horrible end. That Sunday morning, my dad announced that he was going to the soccer stadium with my little brother to watch the big game between River Plate and Boca Juniors. These are 2 rivals, big rivals in Argentina. Boca Juniors is from the poor section of town, and River Plate was the more elite, richer kind of club. I was stunned that I wasn't invited and asked him why. He told me very patiently that the game between River Plate and Boca Juniors was no place for a girl. What? I thought to myself, is he kidding? Had I not just saved my little brother's you-know-what after he voluntarily informed our killers that our parents weren't home? So that was it. If it would take me 35 years to make the point that this was the most ridiculous thing I'd ever heard, I wasn't going to stop until the point was made. This wrong had to be made right at any cost. So in 2008, the president of Octagon, Phil DiPicciotto, and I were invited down to Buenos Aires to present to the board of directors of the Boca Juniors Soccer Club. They were looking to globalize their business and asked if we could help. The meeting was on Monday morning that followed the big game between River Plate and Boca Juniors. My boss said, "How are we going to help them globalize their business?" I said, I don't know. and that's not really important, but we have to go. So as a way to thank us for making the trip all the way down from Washington, D.C., the board invited us as guests of honor to the big game that weekend. Once there, I asked a perfect stranger to please take a photo of me next to Maradona sitting in the presidential box right before kickoff. You can't imagine the feeling of satisfaction and relief when I got to send that photo home to my brother and my father with the message that this Boca stadium, called Bombonera, is indeed the right place for a girl. The next day, we presented to the handsome men in dark suits and white shirts. The discussion went on for several hours until we were given a short break. I asked the president if I could please use the restroom. He gave me a look of deep concern and told me that he'd been worried about this moment for days. Why? I asked him. Well, because we don't have a ladies' room in our boardroom. In fact, you're the first lady to have stepped into our boardroom. Oh, I see. Well then, unless you want me to go in the plants, I'm going to have to ask permission for you to give me permission to use the men's room. So that was a very memorable moment and one that to me was significant in a big change that was made. I think the men at Boca Juniors saw the light and not that things are too much different now, but I think they appreciated the fact that we do have talent and work hard. So how the two jobs connect for me at present. In the athlete representation business, what we do is to provide an environment of guidance, education, advice, ideation, implementation, and so forth, while also building a sound business around the athlete. We manage to the athlete's individual needs, to his or her strengths and weaknesses, which are often the same. So your natural reaction to this is, oh, so you're an agent. And my natural reaction to that is to break out into hives. An agent facilitates a transaction between two parties. You've heard jokes and seen caricatures about money-grabbing agents who are never entirely honest. But that could not be further from the truth of what describes us as managers of athletes. In fact, when you represent an athlete, you better be ready to make many sacrifices in your own life. It's an expensive labor of love that is all-consuming if you want to do it well. When we began representing women professional tennis players, women professional tennis players in the early 80s, the platform on which they performed was very limited. The sport was still in an infant stage. Billie Jean King and her 8 colleagues had broken away from the establishment 8 years before that, with incredible courage, vision, and commitment to build the tour that has become the right place for a girl, and they even have bathrooms for girls. In those days, Phil DiPicciotto played a central role in creating jobs for athletes around the world. Phil was instrumental in breaking down some significant geographic barriers by bringing women's tennis to markets like Russia and East Germany in the days of the Iron Curtain. Phil led by example and showed us that impossible is but a small word for small men, as in the Adidas slogan, impossible is nothing. In the post-Phil era, which doesn't really exist because he's always very close, we continued to conquer the planet. We went to the Middle East, where it was inconceivable that female athletes would be able to compete in body-hugging, tight, high-performance fabrics that barely covered their beautiful derrieres. And we began a journey in Latin America, which continues to grow today. We went to China, where we now have one of our 4 biggest events on tour, and a Grand Slam champion called Li Na. Octagon has played an important role in women's tennis by supporting the WTA in its creation of a major international platform, which in turn allows these exceptional women to showcase their skills. This was the vision with which our management business began in the 80s, and it is the premise of our present work as well. In a nutshell, from both a macro perspective and a smaller nutshell perspective, the dual approach is 1, to protect and grow the business around the individual athletes, and 2, to protect and grow the sport as a whole. I personally balance the two jobs, the two roles, knowing that if I have to make a decision for the greater good that could potentially be at the expense of Octagon, I can do that. In 2003, I joined the WTA Tour Board as the tournament rep for Asia Pacific, and Larry Scott was the newly appointed CEO, and Sony Ericsson was about to make tennis history with the biggest investment in tennis ever at $88 million over 6 years. Larry, as you probably know from the Pac-12, is a rare combination of he's a supreme visionary and flawless implementer. He's one of the most intelligent and ambitious people I've ever had the pleasure of working with. Under Larry's leadership, the WTA was reinvented, and that, by the way, is the key to successful business. The ever-changing market forces that are created by a variety of factors call for continuous reinvention of market drivers. Larry and the WTA team made every piece fit together. The athletes were protected by shortening the tour calendar and by placing the tournaments in efficient geographic in an efficient geographic flow. The top players were incentivized with carrots and sticks to play the tournaments with the highest amount of prize money. The smaller tournaments were given extra wildcards and other tools to succeed in smaller markets. There was a strategic direction that made sense, and that took women's tennis to the next level. What the WTA also did very well was to map out a solid media plan with a tactical framework around the ever-expanding digital world. Technology has, of course, played a major role in the reinvention of everything, and tennis is no exception. From rackets to fabrics to shoes to cable TV, internet, electronic line calling, you name it. Our world is changing faster and faster, and we not only have to keep up, but we have to stay ahead of the curve and determine where and how the curve actually turns. Imagine that in February of 2004, when Facebook was launched, we were still becoming familiar with MySpace, which is currently in no space or in outer space. In 2009, Facebook had 200 million users. And had it been a country, it would have been the 5th largest economy in the world. Today, 3 years later, Facebook has close to 1 billion users and will soon become the largest social community known to man. Think about it. 10 years ago, Facebook didn't even exist. 2 weeks ago, Facebook bought a company called Instagram for $1 billion. Instagram didn't exist before October of 2010. This is how fast we have to think, move, forecast, create, and recreate. Good luck. The digital world presents a great opportunity and also a great challenge. It obviously broadens the platform of an athlete tremendously, and it allows for content control and targeted messaging. It is perfect for dovetailing two brands and intensifying the spotlight. Conversely, the digital spectrum is so broad and so competitive that a message can get totally lost if it's not relevant. In addition, there are no filters, and one bad judgment call can negate a lot of good ones that were made before the one bad one. Easily tracked digital movement by fans and consumers takes away the speculative upside that can be quite powerful to an athlete during a negotiation of an endorsement. The WTA has done an extraordinary job of building and managing the digital side of its player business. This is very helpful to us as managers. By working together with the tour and the athletes' partners, we are able to maximize the momentum created by the athlete's performance. And at the end of the day, if the community around the athlete is strong, relevant, and impactful, everybody wins. Make no mistake, however, it all starts with the substance and quality of the product.
This is true for an athlete with a #1 ranking and Grand Slam titles, and it applies equally to the shoes made by Nike or Adidas, the rackets produced by Wilson or Head, and the good hard work by all of us to create the best possible return for every hour spent training and every dollar invested in rights related to name and image use. The digital community for women's tennis is thriving. To prove this, in the summer of 2011, a request for proposal, an RFP for the WTA TV rights, was won by a company that is based in London called Perform. Perform is the largest supplier of online sports content. When the WTA TV rights became available, Perform realized that it couldn't afford to lose the content it had accumulated related to women's tennis. Perform partnered with a television rights sales group called IEC Lagardère and doubled the value of the WTA's current television package. Many of you know Stacey Allister, today's CEO of the WTA. Being the first winner of the Warsaw-Thurston Award, you've experienced Stacey's eloquence, leadership skills, and superior talent here in Oregon. As two very good friends who've worked together for over 10 years, Stacey and I are incredibly proud and thankful to be involved in the sport of women's tennis. From the $1 contract signed by the Fearless Nine in 1970 to 2,000 players from over 90 countries who compete for over $70 million in prize money every year, we've indeed come a very long way, baby. People often ask me, what is the best thing about your job? And the answer is obvious. It's people. From the athletes to everyone at the tour to our team at Octagon, there are some spectacular human beings involved in tennis. I've told you about Larry Scott, Billie Jean King, Phil DiPicciotto, Stacey Allister, and there are many more where those superstars came from. One of them is Alistair Garland, who's sitting in the front row here. Alistair, stand up. He just got engaged last Sunday. And we wish him, he deserves, and his fiancée, Nicola Murphy, who's wonderful, deserve every happiness. So, many of our friends in the tennis family actually live here in Oregon, and we love them, both from Adidas and Nike. So, like our grandparents said, it's all about a solid team effort. And while what we do in sports today is not the difference between life and death as it was in 1940, and I said this in Palm Springs, we really have learned from our wartime underground sports heroes how to transcend the boundaries of sports. And every time that we see the dreams of a little girl somewhere on this planet turn into reality, we can confidently look up to our ancestors for a loving nod of approval. Thank you very much. Wait 1 second. So to close, we wanted to show you a preview of something like Ellen's Oscar-winning movie, We Grew Wings. And this is a little bit of a video history of the long way that women's tennis has come. And it's only a few minutes, but I think you'll enjoy it. So thanks again very much for having us here today.
The new century brought about more personalities, more athleticism, and more global stars on the tour. The first year belonged to Venus Williams. The emergence of the Williams sisters was a story that threatened to explode at the end of the 1990s.
Sorry.
Don't worry.
I guess it's not one.
So you open that and just...
Yeah, I'm sorry.
No, don't worry about it.
Do you want to play the octaves?
Yeah, okay.
Maybe
All right, we're going to show you a different movie. This is the Octagon highlight movie. It's kind of similar. dinner time.
So thank you, Micky, for all of your insights. We really appreciate you being here tonight. Thanks. Just a couple logistical issues before we wrap up here. When we adjourn through those doors, there's going to be food and drinks outside for you guys to enjoy. If I can just get the panelists and the student committee to stick around the stage area for photos, that would be amazing, and then we'll join you guys outside for some food. Really quick, I'm going to just pick the raffle winner if you dropped your business card in when you got here. Maybe you win. Dawn Cheney, if you want to meet Julie in the back of the room later, you can get your prize. So I just have a few thank yous to go through. This great event wouldn't have been possible without the support of Nike and all of our other generous sponsors. So big thank you to all of them. Thank you to the White Stag for hosting us. And I also really appreciate my amazing committee of fellow students for all your hard work making this event happen. It's been an honor working with you guys. And finally, thank you to Paul and Whitney for your leadership and helping us continue the vision that Jim Warsaw had and started with this event. So if we can just get, and a final thank you to our panelists. You guys are fantastic. So if I can get a round of applause. Thank you guys. And go enjoy food and drink.